And Schindler writes, over the course of the digression that occupies the dialogue's middle books, in reference to Plato's Republic, Plato makes a series of basic statements regarding the nature of the good. It is not only the foundation of truth, but it is also the cause of the existence of all things and the goal of all human action. Now, that last one really strikes me, the goal of all human action. I think I mentioned this to you yesterday, but again, in Austrian economics, they say all human action is an expression of value, whatever your highest value is in your internalized value hierarchy. That's what you're doing in any one moment. The simple way to say that is to walk from one side of the room to the other implies or expresses that you value being on the other side of the room than you do being in your present position. And the other thing that struck me here, just on things that I've read and talked about on the show, is, and I know I've mentioned the book to you, Leela by Robert Pirsig.
Of course.
And not to ruin the book, but I don't think it would be ruining it for you per se. But his punchline at the end of that book is that the good is a noun rather than an adjective. And so it struck me here that Plato described his three basic statements on the nature of good are nouns, basically saying that it is the foundation of truth, cause of all existence, the existence of all things, and the goal of all human action. So is there, maybe you could just elaborate on whatever connection there is between, I guess, value in the sense of human action and goodness.
Right.
And how that, I guess how, we typically, I think most people's mindset typically is that good is an adjective. I think I'm choosing the right word here, where it's
you are.
That's a good car, that's a good dress, good food. Yeah. But there's kind of an inversion here of some kind where good is actually more of a noun.
So it's hard to do this without getting into the depths of it right away. So, and by the way, thank you for making the connection to Pirsig. Sevilla King, and who christened the term "this little corner of the internet," is constantly carrying on this very helpful dialogue on her channel between the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and Lila, Pirsig's work, and a lot of the stuff that work I'm doing. And and Pirsig has this very interesting, almost ambivalent relationship with Plato. That's a really important subtext of the book. So just as a help to the audience, you making that connection, I think, is very good to quote a word. Now, why a noun? Because well, let's first of all let's make the connection you wanted to make between value and goodness. So value is a term that came out of, in the sense you're using it, as a term that came out of modernity, was given a special sort of central role in Nietzsche. The Übermensch is the being that can engage in the transvaluing of all values and all that stuff. But a way to do it might be to back out of that term and try to connect it to something that's in Plato, which is these two notions of love and desire. And so one way of thinking of how to connect value to what Plato's talking about is to desire something. It contains within it what you might call a cognitive judgment. And the cognitive judgment is that it is in somehow good. It is in some way good. So when I desire water, I desire it because I think it to be good in some way. Now, it might be purely instrumental. It's good for quenching my thirst, or it's good for keeping me alive. Or I might desire something that has that's good for its own sake. Like I desire to listen to the Ninth Symphony by Beethoven, because I just find that experience is just an intrinsically good experience. And so, and then of course, love means something, and we'll get into this as we go through chapter 2. It means something beyond desire. The problem I have with the word value is it tends to sort of, it tends to maybe even potentially conflate all of these things that we might want to distinguish from each other. I can get up and cross the room because I desire to do so. I can get up and cross the room because I fear to do so. I can get up and cross the room because I love to do so. Like, there's all these different things. And so the cognitive aspect of it tends to be lost to some degree in the term value. Because I think perhaps, and this is a supposition on my part, I think perhaps what the economists were doing, were trying to find something sort of as a unifying term for many kinds of ways in which people are motivated towards some goal that they could then use within their economic theorizing. So I'm not challenging their use of the term, but what I'm trying to say is, I think what we want to do, if we want to understand Schindler's argument, is we have to take that single term and break it back up. And then what we do is we get two poles, which are central to chapter 2. We get what you might call a cognitive conative pole, how you are sort of judging and orienting yourself towards something. And then also what you might want to call, right, the objective pole, in the sense of what it is about the object that makes such a relationship to it actually possible for you. So presumably you live, just to hopefully choose a non-controversial example, you live in a world with a particular body that means you have sets of desires that pick up on properties in the environment that might be different from a bat's set of ways in which, so there's features of its environment and its biology that fit it and create affordances for interaction, and so that's why I think stepping out of the term value, again, I'm not making any argument against its use in economic theory, but I'm saying if we want to understand Schindler's argument, we step out and then we open it up and we have desire and love and things like this, the cognitive conative pole, and then we have the features of the thing that make sense of that, and the two fit together via intelligibility in some important sense. So I hope that was helpful.
That is quite helpful. This is a bit of a tangent, perhaps, but would you mind expanding on and this is again a tangent to the book even, but I've often just wondered about what, if any, connection there is between something like, say, economic value, moral value, intellectual value. Like, what is the through line for value itself?
Well, I mean, once you do what I suggested, I think you can apply Schindler's argument to it, which is what you're doing is pointing to the good within those various domains, and you have to integrate that with what we talked about last time, which is this notion of the good is that you get up by seeing through ethical goodness and aesthetic goodness and epistemic goodness, And what you're trying to do is you're trying to see sort of the foundational ontological goodness. So I would say that there's a combination of two things in a sense, like intellectual value or economic value. There's a sense in which we're trying to point to a way in which we're appropriately fitted to reality. And we're going to have to cash that out and make more sense of that in all of these domains. And then we're doing something that's general in that sense. But then what I think we're doing is we're then also doing something specific to each domain, which is how does that general fittedness actually work with it? How is it good? How is it specified so that it is good for the economy or economic behavior, or good for the intellect or intellectual behavior? And so in that way, and the philosophers are knowing that I'm trying to stitch together Plato and Aristotle here, which of course is a project of all Neoplatonism. But that's how I would try to answer your question.
Excellent. So it's back to this, I mean, fitness, to choose a purely scientific term. I don't know if it's purely scientific, but at least in a Darwinian sense, fitness is a pretty strongly scientific term. that's something that closely approximates value or goodness in these domains, that there's a
Yes,
fittedness.
yes. And that fittedness is somehow simultaneously, and I'm trying to use these words very carefully, but also with some sort of, you know, connotation beyond their strict denotation. That fitness is somehow true to the world, but also true to you. And it truths the two of you together in a way. So it's not just like you're fitted to the environment and the environment is tyrannical over you. And it's not that you're fitted to the environment and you're tyrannical over it. And this is why all the metaphors of coupling and love are coming out. You're fitted to each other in a way that's affording reciprocal opening, or what Plato calls anagoge.
Got it. Okay, the reciprocal opening is anagoge. Sorry, one last question on this and we'll move on. But is this related at all to the procession and reversion? And that in the act
Yes.
of fitting yourself to the environment, there's some procession or expression, but it's also
Yeah,
pushing back on
yes.
you. So there's a
Yeah,
reversion.
yes. You can see, so now you're referring to the Platonic notion, but you can see the idea that that the good in some sense differentiates itself, right? So and let's use the analogy you've been using. It's a good analogy. Let's remember it's an analogy, but it's a good, strong analogy. The way sort of adaptivity is specified into all these different ways, morphologies of an organism, but nevertheless, there is one universal process, evolution, by which adaptivity, right, it is and is understood, right? So it gives you the what's the through line of all these organisms? Well, they don't have the same shape. You know, I make this argument all the time, right? But nevertheless, what they're doing is an instantiation, a particular instance of that adaptability, and they are all within a universal, like, through line, something that integrates them and makes them all intelligible individually and together, which is the theory of evolution, which both is the thing that causes evolution, not the theory. Evolution causes, but also makes adaptivity understandable to us. If you try to understand adaptivity without evolution, you have a, well, you're into perhaps something like intelligent design, right? But what evolution does is it both causes and makes knowable to us what adaptivity is. And so you can see, you know, the procession out and then the return. Did that help?
It does a lot. And then what came up for me there is that so the universal process of evolution or adaptivity becomes expressed in this multiplicity of organisms. Yeah. And again, I'm just mapping that back onto economics. There's the universal market process that becomes expressed in this multiplicity of goods. Of course, we call them goods. What else would we call them? Yeah. And that also seems to be an ongoing process of, like, you know, fitness, experimentation, you know, certain technologies work for a while for a certain teleos or purpose, and then something better comes along.
Yes.
So yeah, it's, yeah, processual again, I guess would be the term.